Hey everybody, it's me again. Today, I wanted to make a video about why I think you should heal in World of Warcraft. Ever since I started playing WoW, there's always been a healer shortage and a lot of conversation around the healing role in general, and I wanted to kind of give my thoughts on it and why I think you should give it a try. I think a lot of the reason why we tend to have a healer shortage is that the healing role has a lot of responsibility on its shoulders. And it often tends to be the role that is blamed the most in groups if a key goes bad or whatever. I don't think it's any different than maybe like a pitcher in baseball or a goalie in hockey, where you could save 29 shots, but when that 30th one goes in and you guys lose, it can feel like your fault, and that can be really daunting. But there's a lot of really good things I think can come out of healing in this game, and I wanted to share some of it. But I also wanted to share too on this YouTube channel. I'm trying to make a lot more guides that are, maybe towards the more beginner, intermediate style of player. I think there's a huge saturation of high-end content creators out there, but I'm kind of trying to see if I can lean into maybe some of these people that are currently play DPS and want to try to heal because they're tired of waiting in queue, or maybe some people that maybe play healer in Overwatch and they're trying to get into World of Warcraft and feel like healing is more their style. So I'm hoping that going forward, you'll find more of those helpful videos on this channel. But this video is about why I think you should heal. And the first reason why I think you should heal is that it's easy to get into groups. This game is an MMO, and the role of healing requires a group. And often healer is the bottleneck. Right now, it seems to be, especially in Mythic Plus, that tanks are also a problem, but healing tends to be something that is needed. So I think it can be really fun to play a role in a group-centric game that is desirable, and it is often a role that a lot of people aren't willing to play. So if you're willing to try and get good at it and enjoy it, it can be really easy to find groups. Whenever I'm farming for, let's say, the Time Lost Protodrake, it takes me like seconds to get into Group Finder. At the beginning of the expansion, when you're queuing, like a lot of heroic dungeons as you're leveling really fast to get in as a healer, and that could just be nice. I often find too, if you're in a guild, I find myself getting pinged a lot in Discord, like, hey, can you come heal this key? And so it almost becomes, you go from waiting in a dungeon queue for an hour just to do one dungeon that fails versus to now like telling people, no, I want to take a break because you're just doing dungeons all the time. And that can be kind of a fun burden to have, is constantly be asked to join groups. That being said though, another reason why I think healing is good, and it kind of includes a con of healing, is it changes the way that you play the game and the way that you gear a character and the motivation behind gearing a character. If we take the DPS player or a DPS role, let's say Ret Paladin, every day you log in, every weekly reset, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get higher eye level, trying to get a better weapon, whatever, better stats to increase your DPS. That tends to be the metric of which we determine if you are a good DPS or not. Is at the end of the dungeon, let's look at details, or let's look at your logs. What is that number? There's obviously a lot more nuance to what makes a good DPS, but on the face of it, that's what people are looking for. If you go to a Twitch stream, they're going to be talking about the DPS meter, and sometimes they'll even hide DPS meters on streams to try to incentivize their players to play better, not just improve their DPS. But I'll digress from that. But essentially what we're trying to do is, there is a very solved, very specific way we know we're going to increase our DPS. Like, we know if we play a Ret Paladin that we need a certain amount of haste and a certain amount of mastery to do more damage. And we literally can put our character into a website like raid bots and simulate our character, and it basically solves the equation for us. I know exactly every season what gear I need, but when you play a healer, it's not that simple, because the healing role isn't as easily quantified. Like, what makes a good healer? If it's not just raw HPS, because the HPS meters, honestly, similar to damage, a lot of that can be misleading. What is a lot of that overhealing? Was it necessary healing? And especially in a dungeon environment, it can vary. HPS numbers can vary on, is your group taking damage? Right? If you have a group that is standing in a lot of AoEs, your HPS will improve, but is that making you a better healer? There's a lot more to it than that. So when you're gearing a healer, I think it's a lot more interesting because it's not black and white. I think the healing role and the healing specs have a lot more diversity in what builds they can use and what stats they can use. And obviously, if you go to Wowhead or you check a streamer or a YouTuber that plays the class that you're interested in, they probably have a BIS list or a set of items or stats that you probably should do. But I really do think that in the healing role, especially in like the mid to lower levels of difficulty, I'm not talking about like top end keys or rating, I'm just talking about, 10s and less on the Mythic Plus scale and maybe some Mythic bosses. There's a lot more wiggle room in what you can play, what talents you can take, and you can start adding in your personal flair. Even just little things like tweaking how much haste you have can make a huge difference per spec. You could play Holy Paladin with, let's say, a little less than 25% haste, but really focus on crit and really focus on versatility because you want your spells to feel like they hit really hard. Or you can go the other end of the spectrum and really dive into haste, have like 30 to 32% haste, have a really nice APM playstyle where you're pressing a lot of buttons, but things might not hit as hard, but you're allowed to hit more spells at once. And there's pros and cons to both of those. I won't necessarily get into the weeds on what you should do. That's not the point of this video. The point is, though, is I think that playing healer allows you to be more dynamic and have more freedom to try new things. I think, I don't play all the healers right now. I mainly play Holy Paladin, but just to use them as an example, it is perfectly viable to play either of the hero talents for Holy Paladin. And that's not always the case for DPS. DPS can often have a huge discrepancy, and because it's very easy to quantify if a DPS spec is good or not, or if a piece of gear is good or not, or if a talent is good or not, it kind of pigeonholes you into one specific spec. Now, to be honest, you don't have to do that, but when we judge DPS often in the community based on how much damage they are doing, you could feel some pressure by your group or by your guild if maybe you're not performing as well as you could because you're playing something you prefer. But as a healer, it's not necessarily the case because there's a lot of other ways that you can play where, let's say, raw HPS is not your concern. Things like kicking, mitigation, making sure you're calling out for when your friends should press their cooldowns, their defensive cooldowns, knowing when to time your cooldowns. I think a lot of healers can play the version of the healer that they prefer and still accomplish a lot of their goals. And honestly, in terms of meta, which brings me to another reason to play healer, is I don't necessarily think there is the correct healer. And I do think there's more wiggle room in the pug scene as well, at least in the keys I'm talking about. I'm not talking about 12 plus. But if we're just trying to get some 10s in or even just lower keys, it obviously would be easier to get into keys as a meta healer. However, I do think that there's, especially at this point in the expansion, groups are desperate. And if you're the only healer applying and you have a good Radar IO score and you know your class well, you're probably going to get invited, where it might not be the same situation for the DPS counterpart that wants to play kind of an off-meta spec. So between the ability to play a lot of different classes, a lot of different hero specs or talents inside those classes, and really customize it to your playstyle, I think that makes healing really fun and diverse and allows you to express yourself more as a player and try things out and see what works and what doesn't. Another reason why I really like playing healer in an MMO, and specifically World of Warcraft, is I feel like it makes you interact with the MMO part of the game more than another class, because without other people, you have nothing to heal but yourself. And at that point, you're just a bad DPS, right? You're just a DPS doing less damage and just healing yourself. So to literally do your job or express your power level, you need to have other people around to heal. And so I think it does kind of promote this more playstyle of not only are you getting more invites, you're getting more people to seek you out to join their group, but you're also needing to be in a group, whether that's a raid or a party, to do your class. Like if I want to be a Holy Paladin and I want to heal people, I literally need other people, and it can encourage you to do more things socially. Like if you need to do a delve, you might not just go do it by yourself, because you would find it more fun to just continue to heal and have a couple of your friends come in and then be able to heal them and express your healing that way. So in a way, it can, when the game, especially retail, it sometimes can really feel like a solo game with the queuing and LFR and the pug scene with Mythic Plus. I think playing a healer can help nudge you towards being a little more social and putting yourself out there, which I find makes the game more enjoyable for me. Honestly, the reason why I stick with World of Warcraft over any other game is the social aspect. The being with other people, the coordinating with other people makes it more fun for me. And so playing the healing role that kind of requires that, it just kind of aligns with the way I like to play anyway. A lot of people will say, I'll hear it a lot, that DPS is just objectively more fun than healing, and I don't necessarily think so, and I'll explain why. When you are DPSing, just like how for the most part, there's a pretty solved way to gear your character and to spec your character. There's also a pretty solved way on how to play your character. Literally the rotation, the way you press your buttons and when, is almost kind of solved. And when you do, let's say, Mist of Tyrannus Scythe, if we do them with the same group that does the same route, you will know when you press your CDs, you will know when to hold them, you'll know the damage patterns. And so from one mist to the other, generally speaking, as long as things go perfectly fine and no one dies or no one pulls anything, you are generally going to do the same rotation every single time. I mean, the whole point of a rotation is to, in a way, to make it scripted, to make it easier to play your class. But when you're playing a healer, every time you do that same mists, it could be completely different because you have 5 humans in this group that all make mistakes every once in a while. And when a damage player makes a mistake, they might have to press a cooldown, maybe press health pot. You hope they do, but they maybe press health pot or health stone. So their rotation might be hindered a little bit, but generally speaking, they're going to continue to do what they were doing. The healer is the one that has to drop what they're doing and solve that problem. And I find that kind of dynamic gameplay very fascinating, where even in a raid environment where your CDs will be planned, and you, at a certain level, you likely have like a healing officer or your raid leader literally calling out for Spirit Link Totem or Aura Mastery. But in terms of your actual rotation, it's very much different and dependent on what's happening in front of you. And I find that way more entertaining than doing damage. I think doing damage and seeing the numbers go up is really interesting. But when you're the healer, every time you do a dungeon, depending on who you're with, it can drastically change how things feel. And I find that really fun. And finally, one of the last reasons I really like playing healer is it changes the overall goal of the game. I talked about earlier in the video how when you log in as a DPS, your primary concern is, I need to improve my DPS. So everything you do in the game is around getting gear, and you know what gear you need to improve your DPS. When you're a healer, and I talked about this earlier, it's not quite that simple, and it kind of changes the way you're thinking about the game from, I need to do the most amount of damage, I need to get the best parse, to the only thing that matters to you is that you keep people alive and the key is completed or the boss is killed. And I personally much preferred working together with my healers to accomplish the task of killing a really hard raid boss, or working with my group to keep them alive so they can do damage so we can finish the key. And I find that much more fulfilling. It's a much more like outcome-oriented playstyle, a much more, I'm just worried about getting through and timing this key versus trying to top the DPS meters or get a 99 parse. While chasing parsing, worrying about your parse might not be the most productive thing you can do, but let's be honest, it's what a lot of people focus on. And I personally found that kind of boring. It's just this idea that I get this thing and then the number go up, versus when you're a healer, you're more rewarded, less about the gear you have and more about, are you prepared for the dungeon? It really rewards you knowing your class really, really well, and then knowing the dungeon really well so you can prepare for, all right, I know damage is coming out here, or I know this needs to be kicked. And you can control the dungeon and really kind of carry a group in a way if you know what you're doing, have CDs saved up, and are really good at cleaning up a mess that is created by other people. I find that really fun, and I think if you put in the time to understand mechanics, understand dungeons, and understand your class, you can find a lot of fun and fulfillment with that as well. Before I wrap up the video, I do want to talk about some of the cons with healing and some of the ways we can go around it. I'm going to make a whole video on healing anxiety. I'll often read in forums or in discords that people are kind of interested in healing or identify that healing is a needed role in the community. But when they start to get into it, it's very not only intimidating, but it feels very nerve-wracking Like you have all this responsibility, and if you mess up, you're gonna get yelled at, you're gonna get berated for messing up. And that could be true in some pug situations, but I don't think that's always the case. And I think the most important thing you can do, and I will really dive into this deep in the next video I'm gonna make for healer anxiety and how to avoid it, but I think the number one thing you can do is make sure that pick one class, start with a follower dungeon, a friend group, or a delve to learn your rotation, learn how to heal, and then slowly roll into the more difficult things. You can simply do something like, I want to learn healing, so I'm going to only heal Stone Vault because that's the one I have studied. So you only sign up for Stone Vault dungeon groups, and you just run Stone Vault until you've got it down where you're not nervous anymore because you know what to expect and know how to handle it, and then you just do the next dungeon. I understand that might not be as fun to like sit there and try to queue for one dungeon, but I also think it's important to realize that you're a healer. You're not going to be waiting in queue for an hour. You probably can do 2 dungeons for the amount of time it took you just to get into a group as a DPS. So, and I also do think that healing gets better with time. The longer you do it, the more comfortable you get, the more rewarding it can be. And the best thing about it too is every healer can DPS. So if you heal and maybe another healer signs up for the group and you want to DPS instead, or your guild doesn't need the healer that night, you get to DPS. So you kind of get the best of both worlds where you're sought after, you get the fulfillment of helping other people, and you still can. I've done a ton of rep paladin keys this season, and even a couple of prop paladin keys. But being a holy paladin has allowed me to be in that situation, to be needed. But then when I'm not, I can relax and have some fun. I tell you, when you go from healer to DPS, it does change the dungeon quite a bit and can be kind of relaxing. But I always kind of go back to wanting that responsibility. There's a little bit of a fun in having that responsibility in the group and being like, I got this. And when you lay on hands someone that is at like 2% and you save, the group from wiping, I don't care how much damage you do. To me, that is one of the most fun things you can do in this game. So I hope this helped out. I hope this maybe interested you in trying healing out for the first time, or maybe go back to it. Be on the lookout for this channel for healing guides, but also the healer anxiety video I'm hoping to make very, very soon. But hope you had a really good holiday. Hope you had fun, and I hope this one helped you out, and I'll see you next time.